My friends and I recently finished running Curse of Strahd campaign, for which I was the DM, and the final encounter with Strahd was super exciting and challenging, and one of the best design encounters I've ran in my 2 years as a DM. What I'd like to do in this video is go over how I ran the first stage of the battle with Strahd, going into very specific details of how I set up the maps, what were some of the terrain effects or environmental effects, and a little bit about how the battle actually went. There's lots of advice on the internet about how to make your final encounter memorable and how to make the battle last multiple stages. What I'm going to go through today is just the first stage, because when we finally ran our encounter, the players and I agreed afterwards that stage one was the most fun of them all. Now, this is, of course, one way to run this encounter, not the way to run it. And if there are aspects of your campaign which differ from mine, that's great. Feel free to steal whatever you want from this video and throw the rest of it away. Any products that I purchased to use in this encounter, I'll make sure to include links below so that you can find them as well. For anyone who doesn't want to watch the whole video, this is the final map of Strahd's first tomb, and here are the highlights. We decided that once the final battle with Strahd starts, nobody leaves this tomb, the PCs can't leave this space, and Strahd can't leave this space. We added doors to the 3 alcoves at the back of the room so that Strahd has a place to hide, and to give something for the PCs to interact with during the final battle. We took the crypt of Stabal Indibach from the module and moved it to be inside of Strahd's tomb. We placed the teleportation zone at the door so that if any of the PCs try to go that way, instead of leaving the tomb, they are actually teleported down into the crypt below, and a wight from one of these 16 stone coffins replaces them. We added a ladder to the first alcove as an alternate pathway to get down into Stabal's crypt. We added Rahadin's tomb, who the PCs absolutely hated, to the middle alcove, and if the PCs try to open his coffin during the fight, they're going to get hit with a glyph of warding. We added a tomb guardian, in this case a gray render, to the final alcove in order to create an exciting and unexpected start to the final battle. Inside the coffin in the center of the room is not Strahd, but actually Escher disguised as Strahd, who's there to draw out the party's big attacks before Strahd himself is revealed. Strahd, on the other hand, is hidden below the tomb floor and is inside this lower crypt, waiting for an opportune time to emerge and strike at a vulnerable PC. And finally, the tomb itself has 2 environmental effects. The first is that the walls are covered in mist and spectral arms reach out to restrain any PCs who are within 5 feet of the wall. The second is that the coffin in the center of the room emits necrotic energy and damages anyone within 5 feet of it. These effects occur on initiative count 20 every round. We've been playing online using Roll20, and this is a map from the catacombs inside of Castle Ravenloft. As you can see, it's quite large and detailed. This is a high-resolution map that's part of a map pack I purchased from Dungeon Masters Guild, and there's a link to that below. You can see all the different connecting chambers, and anywhere there's stairs or doors, this kind of underground torture chamber, and the catacombs themselves. Now, when you actually get to Strahd's tomb itself, it is actually quite plain compared to the rest of the map. And I think the reason for this is that basically you've been given the entire castle to run as part of your final encounter. So the actual tomb for Strahd itself is very plain. It's a little tiny stairway, rectangular room, and then these 3 kind of alcoves at the back. Now, I did not want to run our final encounter with Strahd using the entire map from the castle, of which this is 1 floor. I mean, Castle Ravenloft is insanely big and confusing. The reasons why I didn't want to use the entire castle for our game was a few. First being that Madame Ava's card reading told the PCs they would specifically meet Strahd in the final resting place, which kind of indicates the tomb. And then to start the battle here and immediately leave seemed like a little bit of a narrative no-no. In addition to that, narrative speaking, Von Richten and Mordenkainen had indicated to the party already that Strahd's tomb, as advertised, is probably a little bit of a ruse, and that he probably has multiple resting places, or at least one sort of final concealed space where his actual resting place is. This sort of matches the flavor of some of the game and what they had experienced throughout Barovia, talking to different people, where different people were able to tell stories from the last couple hundred years saying, oh yeah, people have tried to kill Strahd, they've tried to stake him, and they've killed him in his resting place, and it's never stuck, it's never quite held. And the idea here is that this is not actually his final resting place. The last sort of narrative comment I'll make is that Mordenkainen had said to the party that if he was an extremely powerful immortal whose one weakness was tied to a very specific place, he would do everything he could to keep it concealed. So the implication is that this is not actually the final tomb. And as I mentioned before, we ran this encounter in multiple stages. Stage 1 took place here, but there was actually a second stage deeper down in a different tomb, of which this video does not get into. Now, the biggest reason for me that extending this fight to the entire castle wasn't something I wanted to do was because that would be really, really hard to curate the experience of. I wanted to create a very, very challenging, satisfying fight as our final encounter in this module. And if you run Strahd, rules as written in the castle, straight from the campaign module, he should be basically virtually impossible to kill. He can hit and run indefinitely. He has the ability to walk through walls and ceilings, and he can really just drain the party of resources. And anytime he's in danger, run away, wait 10 rounds to heal up, and then come back. And from a narrative perspective, this battle spanning many different rooms throughout the castle, it seems super, super epic. And I'm sure that there are people out there who have done this really well in their own games. And if you have, please leave a comment below if you've been able to do this so we can all hear about it. I would love to hear about that. But for my game, I could kind of foresee how in practice that might get extremely frustrating for the party and get really grindy and drag out. And as I said, I wanted to curate a very, very fun, exciting battle, but not have it become frustrating for the party. And that is why I decided to not use the entire castle for our final encounter. Now, that being said, Strahd's tomb itself, as it sits, is extremely boring, and we need to spruce it up a little bit. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to run through it, how I did that right now. We're going to keep this map, but we're going to make a couple little changes to it to start with to try and make this fight more exciting. Now, certainly we want to show off Strahd's great abilities without making this fight seem unwinnable, and essentially what we need to do is we need to confine Strahd to this space. I decided that once the players were in this room, once they followed up on the Taroka card reading that said they would meet Strahd here, that nobody was going to leave this space. The PCs weren't going to be able to leave. Strahd wasn't going to be able to leave. And I think that having very clear boundaries and conditions for that makes these strategic combats much more fun because the players have very firm expectations that can guide their actions and that they can play off of. Now, every now and again, we want to alter their expectations or maybe break them, but we want to do it in very specific ways that are going to build excitement and fun, not build frustration. Looking at this map, it is quite simple. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make better use of these 3 alcoves. Rather than just having 3 sort of open spaces here, we are going to add some doors to it, of which I have already prepared over here. And the reason for adding doors to this is we want to show off Strahd's ability to walk through walls. Now, we have these 3 alcoves, and when we add doors to them, we've now given Strahd the ability to hide easily. The PCs know about this ability, at least in my game they did. They had seen this before, and now we're going to get to show it off really well. When the PCs are fighting Strahd in this space, he's going to be able to pop through these walls, he's going to be able to hide, but it isn't unfair. The PCs are going to be able to interact with these doorways, which is going to make the combat fun and give them interesting choices to make. Of course, we don't tell the party that Strahd is hiding in these alcoves during various points in the fight, But they'll see him walk away, they'll wonder where he is, and at some point, they might discover that, hey, we can actually open these doors, and they might find Strahd, and that's really exciting. Now, that might not be difficult for them to guess, but when they do figure that out, they're going to feel smart, and they're going to feel like they're progressing in the battle once they start popping these doors open. For my game, the doors themselves could be opened with a simple action. This created an interesting decision point for the PCs where they have to decide, okay, do we spend our turn opening a door or do we prep some other kind of ability? And for our game, I didn't have the PCs make a roll for opening the doors. All that they had to do was declare that they were using their action to open the door, and that was enough. Again, I said I wanted the map to be dynamic, but also not frustrating. And I didn't want a series of failed strength checks to basically stack up and grind the battle to a halt or make the PCs feel like they weren't gaining anything by choosing to creatively open up a door. Now, for our map, already it's a little bit more exciting. It would be totally fine to have all three of these doors function the same way, but I wanted the battle to have a couple little tricks in it and have different levels to the battle. So each alcove is going to be a little bit unique, and I'm going to explain those in a little bit. What is actually inside of each of these spaces and how the PCs might interact with them. Now, walking through walls is one thing, but once the doors are open, the room is really just a square room again. And Strahd also has the ability to move through floors and ceilings. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another layer to this map that makes it more exciting. We're going to add another chamber that the PCs don't originally know about that they're going to have to discover. Again, it still fits within the same idea that everyone, once this battle starts, is confined to this area. Strahd is confined to this area, the PCs are confined to this area, but there's nothing saying we can't expand it a little bit. In the module Curse of Strahd, one of the tombs in this crypt belongs to someone named Stabal Indibach and reads, "A true friend, here lies his family and honor." And there's this really neat effect where if a PC steps on a specific space outside of Strahd's tomb, they are instantly teleported into a stone coffin inside of Stabal's tomb, and a wight subsequently replaces them and fights the party. So PC comes in, they step on a plate, they get teleported somewhere else, and a wight is replacing them and begins to fight the party. Now, the PC leaves the stone coffin to find a subchamber filled with other stone coffins, which we assume to be Stabal's family. And I really like the idea of this effect. I think it has the ability to create a neat tension where the party gets split up, even if for only a moment. Of course, the problem with this effect is that the teleportation zones are all outside of Strahd's tomb, not in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that effect inside of Strahd's tomb. So we already said that once the PCs enter this room, there's no leaving. So what we do is we add a second layer to this map, which is going to represent a lower chamber. And I actually ended up using one of the free assets from Roll20 that they just give you. I think it is in the dungeon tiles. Yeah, dungeon tiles. And it's called Stained Drains, which is a neat name. There's blood all over the place. So what I did is I had this map off to the side. I had initially had it concealed from the party, so they weren't able to see it. They didn't know anything was up. They would have to discover this room, and that would make it exciting for them. And what we're going to do is we're going to make the teleportation zone be the entire entrance to Strahd's tomb. So if a PC, for some reason, wants to leave this tomb, or perhaps they're forced to leave, maybe they're grappled or something, and they're forced through this space, rather than being able to exit, they're actually going to get teleported down into this chamber. And so what I did is I populated this space with a bunch of stone coffins, as described in the module. I'm only going to put a few here, but I had the whole thing lined with coffins. And basically, when a creature went through this teleportation zone, I had the PCs roll for a random location, and they would get teleported into one of these coffins. And as written in the module, when that happens, the PC moves down a level, and a wight, the wight that was initially inside of that coffin, appears on the front steps to Strahd's tomb, and now the rest of the party has to contend with another enemy, which is super exciting whenever it happens. Like the doors above in Strahd's tomb, I wanted the PCs to be able to interact with the coffin, but I didn't want them to experience frustration at getting stuck inside the coffin. So I made removing the coffin lid free. They had to make an athletics check for me, a DC 12 athletics check, to see how long it took. If the PC failed the athletics check, they still slid the lid off the coffin, but they lost all of their remaining movement for the turn. So they'd still be able to take whatever actions they had left, but they were stuck in this space. Now, of course, there needs to be a way to get out of this tomb. It is not just a tomb by itself. So what I did was I grabbed a ladder token from Roll20 and I put it in the middle of the room and said that there was a metal ladder, that the bars were slippery with moisture, leading 40 feet up out of the chamber. So whenever the first PC to come down here enters this space, they see a mysterious ladder. They have no idea where this ladder goes, but they see that it's the only way out of the room. Little do they know, it exits in one of our alcoves. So there's actually a couple of ways for the PCs to discover this. They could open up the door to Stobble Indibuk's crypt, or they could be transported downstairs and then go up this ladder and somehow make their way back into Strahd's tomb, which is what happened in my game. A PC was transported down here first and then walked up the ladder later and realized that they were back in the initial map. What this does is it gives something interesting for the PCs to interact with. They now have a feature inside the map that isn't part of their character sheet. It's not something that's part of the regular rules. It's new and it's fun, and they can use this to their advantage if they want during the fight, if they have some creative way to use it. Having these two levels also gives Strahd the ability to use his move through floors and ceilings in an interesting way, but it's a fair way. Remember, he is confined to these spaces. He can easily flip back and forth between these two. Maybe the PCs are split up and there's a few of them up above and a few down below, and he can jump back and forth going through the roof or ceiling and attack whoever is the most vulnerable. But the party is able to expect this and expect that he can go between these levels. This also gives the PCs a very slow way down to the burial chamber, using the ladder, and a fast way that has a cost. If the PCs want to get down there right away, they can run through the teleporter, but everyone left up top is going to have to contend with another white that appears. If the PCs want to take a little bit more of their turn or use a little bit more of their actions to get down, they can simply go up and down the ladder here. And this happened several times throughout our fight, where a PC would jump through the teleporter and everyone else up top had to contend with more low-level enemies now. The players really loved this interactive part of the environment, and it led to a few creative moments. There was actually a moment where the Warlock had summoned a fire elemental to contend with all the whites that were now populating the top room. And in order to be out of harm's way and maintain concentration on the summon spell, they actually jumped through the teleporter and then just stayed in the coffin. They actually hid themselves inside of one of these stone coffins, trying to avoid taking damage so that the fire elemental could wreak havoc up above. It was super creative and hilarious to play through. Now, I said that the lower chamber had a roof that was about 40 feet high, and when I described this to the PCs, I said that the ladder was slick with moisture. I wanted the ladder to be something useful, but I also wanted it to be simple to run. So I told the party that any PC could take 2 rounds worth of movement to climb up the ladder safely. But if they wanted to dash up the ladder in a single turn, they would need to make an acrobatics check. Otherwise, they might slip and fall from the ladder. I set this DC as 10 so that it would be easy to make, but also provide the opportunity for dynamic moments if they failed. We have a tomb that neither Strahd nor the party can leave. We have 3 closed alcoves at the back of the room where Strahd can hide and with which the party can interact with during the battle. We have a lower chamber with a slow means of transport in either direction, either going up the ladder or down the ladder. And we also have a fast one-way means of travel where PCs can jump into the teleporter and immediately end up down below, but there's a cost, they're going to spawn a white. And we also have the environmental effects of the slippery ladder, which causes the PCs to make decisions whether or not they want to take 1 turn to go up or 2. What's next? Well, the Tomb of Strahd itself, even with these closed doors, is still a little bit boring. And we want to find ways to influence the PC's position in that space. We don't want the party to move on the first round, lock up with the enemy, and then just stand there for the rest of the fight. So what we're going to do is we're going to add two different effects to this room. Now, I felt that Strahd's tomb should have its own dark powers associated with it, and would therefore get its own lair actions, which would work in tandem to make things tough for the PCs. The first effect will be to try and focus the PCs into the center of the room. Mist clings to the walls of this chamber, and grasping spectral arms reach out and attempt to grab anyone who's immediately next to the wall. Any PCs within 5 feet of the wall, not including the alcove doors, make an athletics or acrobatics check, or else are grappled and restrained by the spectral arms. I set the DC for this at 14. Again, not impossible to beat, but enough that it might happen several times throughout the battle and would make the PCs think about where they were positioned in this space. I'm going to put this green box here to remind myself as well. All of these different features that pertain to rules or little intricacies that the DM puts into the battle can be included in the GM layer of Roll20. So the PCs won't see it, they won't know about it, but you as the DM will have the reminder. Getting the PCs off the walls does two things. First, it groups the PCs together so that Strahd can potentially use his area of effect spells to better effect. Secondly, it's going to force the ranged and squishy wizard characters to expose their backs to both Strahd and any wights which have come through the teleporter. We don't want a character pinning themselves up against the wall and then hanging out in the corner for the entire fight. That's not fun and that's not dynamic. We want them to have to move throughout the space throughout the encounter. The second effect we're going to add tries to split the party up. An evil aura surrounds Strahd's coffin. Waves of necrotic magic emanate from the center of the room, and anyone within 5 feet of the coffin takes 1d4 necrotic damage, and there is no save against this effect. 1d4 is enough of a slap on the wrist to make the PCs move away from the center of the room, but not so much as to be backbreaking during the middle of the fight. As you can see, I've added this purple box here. Again, I'll put this in the GM layer to remind me that if any PCs are in here, they're going to take damage from the coffin. Having no save for this damage makes it easier to run and also gives a sense of power to the space, reminding the players that they are here in a serious fight with high stakes. Keeping the PCs away from the middle, combined with the grappling effect from the wall, forces the party into two different clustered zones within the room, here and here. The PCs can ignore either effect, but may suffer as a result. Again, another interesting decision point for the players to make beyond just which action do I take. When I ran this encounter, I had both effects happen on initiative count 20 together, starting the first round after the combat was already underway. The first time this happened, it surprised the players, and after that point, they knew about what to expect from each of these areas and had to factor it into their subsequent turns. Again, I'm going to leave a couple reminder notes for myself down here so that I can quickly recall how each ability works, and I even color code them to the zone so I remember what corresponds with which zone. So what about these two other alcoves? The middle one is going to be mostly for narrative value. This tomb is recently completed and reads Strahd von Zarovich, Venerated General, Trusted Advisor. In our game, the PCs had fought Strahd several times, and Strahd had personally killed 2 party members. Both of them had been resurrected successfully, but suffice to say that the party hated Strahd. There's actually a great moment in our game when the party was battered and bruised after finally defeating him, and at that moment, Strahd appeared. He lamented the loss of his advisor and adopted brother, and made arrangements to transport the body of Strahd away, which the party also hated as they wanted to loot his corpse. But they were in no condition to confront Strahd at that time. On his way out, Strahd issued a final invitation to the party. Collect yourselves and then come to me. I grow weary of this game and wish to see it ended. This was an indicator to the party that they would be permitted a long rest, and that they would need to go to Strahd's tomb to face him in the final battle. I found that the sandboxy nature of this entire story resulted in my party spinning their wheels a little bit as the campaign was nearing an end, and they weren't all convinced that they should go to meet Strahd, because they didn't know if they could defeat him. Strahd made the decision for them, and this also gave the players enough confidence to go to the tomb and let the battle play out as it may. Now, inside of Rahadin's tomb is another coffin, presumably with Rahadin in it. This area is mostly for narrative value, but if the party opens up this coffin during the battle or after, Rahadin has one surprise left for them. There is a glyph of warding that will trigger and deal 5d8 damage to anyone nearby. So what about this third alcove? Let me explain. After Strahd issued his final invitation to the party, I was pretty confident that they would rest and then make their way to the tomb. Upon entering the tomb, I wanted them to have an opportunity to explore the space. I wanted them to see the spectral arms in the walls, maybe get grabbed a little bit. I wanted them to feel the waves of dark magic coming from the coffin, and I wanted them to read the epitaphs on the alcove doors. Now, despite knowing exactly what they were here for, to fight Strahd in his tomb, I wanted the beginning of the fight with Strahd to be surprising and exciting. So rather than waiting for the party to eventually roleplay their way to opening up his coffin, I had the fight come to them. When a PC explored this slightly different door made of wood that was slightly ajar, they found that it was mangled and off of its hinges. Also, they perceived a low rumbling coming from within. At that point, bursting through the door came a massive 15-foot tall, zombified bear wearing a metal collar around its neck with a heavy chain extending from the collar to the back of the third alcove. This guardian monster could really be anything. It's just a way for the beginning of the fight to be surprising and to ratchet up the tension immediately after the PC's roleplay exploring around the tomb. For our game, flavor-wise, this was actually an animal that the party had previously killed in the Shvalik Woods as part of a homebrewed side quest. Strahd had been intrigued by the beast and had gone and recovered its corpse and then reanimated it as a zombie. For this 15-foot tall zombified bear, I used the gray render stat block from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it worked out pretty well as a way to get the PCs into the fight. The chain attached to the bear's neck and anchored to the wall was mostly for flavor, but it also contributed to the map design, as there was a very, very narrow section of the room where the PCs could stand and be out of the creature's 10-foot reach. This red line shows the area where the 15-foot tall zombified bear would be allowed to move throughout the space. So that means that a party member can only really exist in this space without being within reach of the creature. The zombie bear has exploded from the third alcove, and the fight starts on an exciting moment. After 2 rounds of attacks from the zombie bear, Strahd emerges from his coffin in the middle of the room and joins the battle. Or does he? I wanted the final encounter with Strahd to be a multi-part battle, and I wanted the players to not only have to make decisions about their character actions, but I also wanted the players to have to solve puzzles that were incorporated into the battle. This includes things like the alcoves, the teleporting door that spawns wights, the 2 different chambers that were able to be moved through via a ladder, and the environmental effects of the misty wall and the coffin. The last puzzle in this battle is Strahd himself. Strahd is a tactical genius, and he isn't going to just let the party come in and fire off all their haymaker spells at him in the first round. For the first few rounds of the battle after Strahd appears, he dodges around the room, claws and bites at the party, grapples the PC and drags them through the teleporter, which, by the way, is how I revealed the function of the teleporter to the party. And Strahd causes general mayhem. He does not cast spells, he does not walk through walls, he doesn't banter with the PCs, which they've become accustomed to him doing, and this is all very strange for them, and they start to wonder, what is up with Strahd? At this point in our campaign, the party had already faced Strahd in several battles, and they knew some of his abilities, and it was strange for them to see him not using his best abilities to his advantage. When the PCs finally manage to kill Strahd, he does not immediately turn to mist. And they start wondering, was this really Strahd after all? At this point in our game, there was a great moment where the paladin asked the Sun Sword about it. and the sentience within the Sun Sword said, "This is not the body of Strahd von Zarovich." The face of the dead vampire on the ground started to change, and the party realized that this was indeed Escher, one of Strahd's consorts, who was now lying dead on the floor with a large grin spread across his face. The question, of course, begs to be asked, where is the real Strahd? The real Strahd is lying in wait for an opportune moment to strike. He is hidden on the ceiling in the lower chamber that is filled with coffins. And in our game, when the PCs up in the top room were fighting Escher, the real Strahd took the opportunity to ambush one of the lone PCs who is in the crypt below, rekindling the combat. The rest of the party quickly raced down to the crypts to join the battle, and the real first stage of the fight with Strahd von Zarovich began. The PCs are eventually able to overcome Strahd, and when he finally does die in this catacomb, he turns to mist and escapes through a crack in the floor, indicating to them once more that his real tomb must indeed be somewhere further down in the castle, as the PCs expected. They must now find the entrance to this real tomb, and then face him once more to finally defeat him for good. I hope you were able to take away some ideas from this episode, or at the very least enjoyed hearing about one way to run the first stage of this last encounter in the Curse of Strahd module. As I mentioned before, both me and the players agreed that this was the best combat we had had the whole campaign. It was fun, the environment was dynamic and had interesting interactions, and the players had to make decisions throughout the battle that extended beyond just which action to use from their character sheet. Now, it's entirely possible that you could just run this encounter and have this be the last battle, and I'm sure your players would enjoy it. If you'd like to see more videos like this about suggested ways to run other bosses in the 5th edition campaign modules, please leave a comment below telling me which one you would like to see. My intention is to make more videos about the end game bosses in the 5th edition modules, but I would also like to make some videos about interesting mini bosses in these modules as well. And I'd like your opinions on which ones to do next. My name is Travis, and this is the Daily Travesty.